You know, we're working on controlling our material. So, and that's a really big thing, is I don't want any of you guys to get discouraged today, next week, or next year. You have to embrace the suck. Failure is going to be your best teacher. You know, the more you fail, the better you're going to learn. Like, I love going to work and screwing up a panel because I know I'm going to learn something that day. If everything goes smooth, it was just a good day. If I screw up and ruin a panel, yeah, it sucks. But the knowledge I got out of that failure is going to be extremely beneficial. So you just can't be one of the people that, I screwed up, I suck, I'm never going to touch it again. You have to embrace the failure in the process of learning this. It's a very tough skill, but it's simple tasks that you have to learn how to incorporate to work with one another. All right, we ready to get back to shrinking? So I'll continue on our line, and then I'll start to tighten the edge up a little bit, and then we'll come back in to our next set. First, 2/3, 1/3, and our edge is still a little loose. So I'll just come back and do a quick edge control. We're just going to come in maybe an inch, tighten that edge up. But you can see that it's pulling the form this direction, which again, if I can use this, I'm just going to push down on our outside and use kind of my belly, push up, and we'll adjust that form and get this back into a flat plane, or close. There'll still be some minor adjusting we can do. But you can see that it's starting to pull over, and you can see that progression, and then it starts to wick out a little bit. So once we get the edge controlled a little bit, then we'll repeat that process to the center of our radius, then to the end of our radius, and that'll pull out to a 90. Do we have any questions at this point? No? Either I'm doing a really good job or you guys are just really shy. So let's tighten the edge up a little bit. So we tighten our edge up, and then like I said, we're going to repeat this process, but we're going to have to push through this radius so we can pull some of our form back out and get that closer to flat, or we can just let the tooling adjust the form as we go. And again, that's the cool thing about a power hammer, is it's not going to lock that form in. On a wheel, if we were shaping this, it's going to start to lock that form into the panel and not want to come back out. On the hammer, it doesn't care. We can manipulate it as much as we want. So, we doing all right on time, Mitch?
Yeah, you're good. We'll just roll until lunch, and then we'll come back and do a little count.
Sounds good.
Hey, Mike. So if you're struggling to like figure out if you're having like a form issue or a shape issue, like what's your kind of go-to way to like help you figure that out? Is it just my form that's giving me a problem, or am I shaping it wrong? Or?
Usually that's going to start to develop as you get closer to your final fitment. And one of the best ways to check is if you can clamp it to your buck or your test part and you can get it to lay flat, it's a form issue. If we put this on our buck and we put 3 clamps on it and this side goes, and we put a clamp there and it comes over here and we're chasing that springiness, it's a shape issue. If you can put a handful of clamps on it and it lays perfect, it's just a form issue. Because form is easily done and undone, so it's forcing itself into arrangement. If the shape is wrong, it's not going to fit no matter what. And that's why it gives you that resistance as you're trying to clamp it into place. So don't be afraid to try to clamp stuff. And it's going to tell you, don't overcomplicate that you have to figure it out without ever touching it to the buck or using clamps. Use all of the tools at your disposal to make your life easier. It's hard enough as it is. And on that handout, it talks about all of this being 99% mental. We have, I don't remember how it wrote it, fortitude, patience. Yeah, positive attitude, fortitude, patience, and illness. We all have to be a little crazy to want to do this every day. Like I think you might have said I was on the spectrum earlier. Absolutely. I don't know which spectrum, but I'm on it. So we just have to be a little crazy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Artists are a special type of people. Metal shapers are a special type of people. We're just not normal, and you have to embrace that. So it's all a mental game. There's very little physicality that goes into any of this. It's all a mental game. You have to just be willing to push through it and not settle. You can't be good enough. You have to satisfy yourself and the quality you're chasing.
Right.
So let's shrink, and I'll take a break after that, and then you can ask more questions. So that's our first set to our second light line, and you can see that really starting to pull over. We have our first plane, our first set of shrinks, now it's starting to come over again. And you can see I'm focusing on hitting our starts and stops right on the center. That way we get that nice crisp light line at the start and then the center. So now we're gonna do our rule of 3 again. Stage us off second set on the red lines, 2/3 of the way up, then on and in between, all the way back 1/3, and a little bit of edge control, and then we'll repeat to our final line and keep pulling that over to a 90. And we're still keeping this section relatively flat. What little bit it's not is just form, and we can adjust as we go.
What's the strategy for starting in the middle on your longest line? You started
Personal
here.
preference, it doesn't matter.
Okay. I didn't know if it was.
It does not matter whatsoever. It's just for whatever reason, when I started on a hammer, I thought it would be more efficient to start in the middle, and I stuck with it. So, and that's another good thing is, don't try something new every time. Pick a method and go with it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then adjust. If you do 100 projects, 100 different ways, you're probably gonna get 100 different results. Repetition is key to build efficiency. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Nick talked a little bit about coining and how it's going to happen to all of you. I coined the edge. It happens to everybody. So don't let that worry you too much. We can just clip that off. I usually leave my panels a little bit long anyway, just in case I'm not as accurate as I want to be, and it gives me a buffer room. So if you guys coin the ends a little bit, don't sweat it. It's all part of it. 20 years in metal shaping, I still do it. So it's a good idea to prevent it as much as you can and not get in the habit of just saying, I'll cut it off at the end. But you're gonna have lapse in judgments, bad judgment calls, or I'm gonna lose focus. My problem is squirrel. So this gets really repetitive, and I'm like, man, what are we having for lunch? Ooh, coin the end. I lost that focus for a split second. So get in the habit of not coining the end, but it's not the end of the world. So that's our second set. Now we'll pull to this line and continue to get that over to a 90. Any other questions? No? All right.
Well, yeah, let me get back up front. You know what? When I used to use the shrinking dies on the Pullmax when I'd be making the front fenders on the stock cars, you know, I would shrink on the top edge like you are there, and it would, you know, I'd always have to leave it way long because boy, it would distort that edge tremendously. You know, it would. I mean, do you have that problem too?
Usually not as much on the hammer, because the problem with a Pullmax is it's a fixed stroke machine. So as we're shrinking on a Pullmax, the material is getting thicker and you can't feather the pedal. You flip the switch on, the Pullmax is running. So you're gonna coin it as you come in, coin it as you go out, and then it's gonna start stretching at the end as the material gets thicker. That's why a Pullmax isn't necessarily ideal. You want something that has that width so you can control how hard it hits when you get to the end, and we have that 3/16 air gap.
Okay, because I never had that problem, just wheeling a pedal, losing control of the edges, but boy,
Yeah.
when I would do that, the edge would come like that, and I'd have to, you know, leave a...
Well, and if your edge is doing this, you need more shrink in the middle to pull that the other way. And that's usually, like if you were having a belly this way, you had more form than you had shape. That's usually what happens is you shrink it over, but you're not shrinking enough, and this will bow that way. If we over shrink it, it'll bow this way as it comes around. Like right now, everything's nice and consistent, but moving forward, we really have to focus on our form and our shape as we dial this edge.
Yeah, 'cause I've noticed that edge stays pretty straight.
Yeah.
I've had
Yeah.
What is the
different.
definition of coinage? I mean, you're hitting around the end?
Well, some of that is just this.
Okay.
You're not gonna be able to coin that much to get this. It's just gonna start to crack at the edge if you continually stretch and coin right at that edge.
Also, that means it's overstretched.
Yeah, you're stretching where you're trying to shrink, so you're fighting yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
But that last little ½ inch or 1 inch is not gonna be enough to overpower this 6 to 8 inches that we're shrinking over.
Okay.
So it's not gonna bend the panel backwards. Bending it this way, like I said, you just don't have enough shrink. If you continue to shrink, it would flatten it, and then if you shrink even more, it would bring it this way. So that's gonna be controlled by what the design of the part you're trying to make is. And this is just a lot of shrink to show how much you can pull material over. And if we didn't want a radius in this, we could shrink to this point every time and it'll pull it to a tight 90 with an 1/8 inch radius. So how far apart our start, center, and end of our radius is gonna be what dictates the softness or aggressiveness of the final product. Because you can see wherever I put Nick's part, is what his are about the same amount, but he's shrinking less in between. I'm stacking them really tight to pull that radius over. If he was to have one here and one there, that would be an even softer radius. But in reality, we're not that much different. I'm going for a 7/8 or an 1 7/8 radius, and Nick's part was a 2.5. So they're very close, and that's why our layout is very similar. My lines are 3/4, his are probably closer to 1 inch, just spacing that arc length out. So we'll do one more and start tightening this edge up, and then we can get this pulled over and we'll planish it out and start to dial in our fine radius. So we hit our line and you can see a nice flat plane, somewhat even radius, even though it's lumpy, is where we've stacked our shrinks, and then it's pulling over. We're not quite to a 90 yet, it still fans up. So to get that to drop, we need to shrink again to that same point. So here I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. Instead of using our blue line, I'm gonna switch into our red line to that point, just so it's more consistent. We're not getting a lot of shrinks and a lot of lows in between. And we're just gonna start pulling this to a 90. So it should only be about one more.
Yeah.
Well, that's even just a form issue.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just a form problem. But here, I mean, you can see that it's still kind of bulbous. So we'll just come in and tighten that again. Any questions?
How far in are you gonna go?
Was that?
How far in are you planning on going?
Back to our final line, that way it pulls to a 90 off that radius. Like I said, I'm just gonna switch to our red lines, but to that point, because we shrank here, so now we'll do in between and then start staggering back. And this is where things are gonna get a little bit more tricky to hold. And you can see that that's flattening out, and then it almost tells you right where your 2/3 need to be. You know, it starts to show you where it fans back up. As we come across, it's flat, fans up, that's where we're gonna shrink to next. Now our panel is pulled over pretty well. If we adjust the form one more time. You can see this surface is still pretty flat. This is pretty flat here. It actually dips down, but as we blend this line over on the other hammer, it'll start to smooth that out. So what we'll do is we'll jump over to pH 28. I have a 36-inch radius lower, flat top upper, and we'll blend back up to this line. And we'll push and keep that pretty flat.
Can you explain that again?
Which one?
About putting the line.
Yeah, so I clean that line up a little bit, so we'll walk over here. So we're going to use